Love is supposed to be blind, but for Richard Sterling, love was entirely about optics. For 5 long years, he hid his wife, Clara, away like a shameful secret in their sprawling Connecticut mansion. While he ruthlessly climbed the corporate ladder, clinking crystal champagne flutes with Manhattan's elite, she was buried under mountains of laundry, raising their children and mourning her lost dreams. He told her she simply didn't fit in with his high society crowd anymore, convincing her she was nothing more than a frumpy housewife. He thought he had her completely broken and entirely under his control, but Richard made one fatal, catastrophic mistake. He forgot exactly who Clara was before she married him, and at the most exclusive luxury gala of the decade, she was about to remind him and shock everyone. The master bedroom of the Westport estate smelled of crisp linen and Tom Ford cologne. Richard Sterling stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, meticulously adjusting the Windsor knot of his silk tie. At 34, Richard was the youngest senior vice president at the prestigious investment firm of Sterling and Harrison. He was sharp, ambitious, and obsessed with perfection. Behind him, sitting on the edge of the plush, king-sized bed, was his wife, Clara. Clara was 22 when they met, a vibrant, fiercely creative woman with a fire in her eyes and sketchbooks constantly overflowing with designs. Now, at 31, the fire had been smothered by years of isolation and exhaustion. She wore a faded, oversized grey cashmere sweater and comfortable leggings. Her dark hair, which she used to cut into an edgy, asymmetrical bob, was now pulled back into a messy, utilitarian bun. Dark circles framed her expressive green eyes, the undeniable signature of raising 2 toddlers virtually single-handedly, while her husband conquered the financial world. "Are you sure you don't want me to wait up?" Clara asked, her voice soft, almost hesitant in the cavernous room. "I could make a late dinner. I know these client drinks usually run long." Richard didn't turn around. He leaned closer to the mirror, inspecting a non-existent flaw on his jawline. "Don't bother, Clara. I'll probably grab something at Le Bernardin with the partners. You should just get some sleep. You look tired." The word tired was loaded. It was Richard's polite, passive-aggressive code for unkempt. Clara swallowed the lump forming in her throat. She looked down at her hands. Her nails were short and unpolished, a stark contrast to the manicured, diamond-clad women Richard spent his evenings with. "Richard," Clara began, trying to keep her voice steady. "The Vanguard Summit Gala is next Friday. I saw the calendar notification on the family planner. It's the biggest event of the year for your firm. Spouses are invited, right?" Richard's hands paused on his tie. The silence in the room suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. He slowly turned around, his expression a carefully practiced mask of sympathetic condescension. "Clara, sweetheart," he sighed, walking over and placing a heavy hand on her shoulder. "The Vanguard Gala isn't just a party. It's an aggressive networking battlefield. It's black tie, strictly haute couture, and full of aggressive socialites. It's not your scene anymore." "It used to be my scene," Clara whispered, looking up at him. "Before the kids, before we moved out here. I used to thrive in those environments." Richard offered a tight, patronizing smile. "That was a long time ago. Look at yourself, Clara. When was the last time you even bought a dress? You'd be miserable trying to squeeze into something uncomfortable, surrounded by people you have nothing in common with. Besides, Chloe is going to be my point person for the Rousseau acquisition. We need to present a unified, aggressive front. Chloe Sinclair." The name sent a familiar, icy spike through Clara's chest. Chloe was a new junior partner at the firm. Young, ruthlessly ambitious, and stunningly glamorous. She possessed the kind of sharp, polished beauty that Richard constantly praised. "So you're taking Chloe as your +1?" Clara asked, her voice tightening. "She's a colleague, Clara." "Don't be dramatic," Richard snapped, his patience evaporating instantly. He grabbed his custom-tailored suit jacket from the valet stand. "I'm trying to secure a $100 million buyout of a French fashion house. and you're worried about a party. Stay home with Oliver and Sophie. It's where you're needed. It's where you belong." Without another word, Richard grabbed his leather briefcase and walked out. Clara listened to the heavy thud of the front door, followed by the low growl of his Porsche backing out of the driveway. She stood up and walked over to the mirror Richard had just abandoned. She stared at her reflection. The woman looking back at her was a ghost. She had given up her own thriving career in the fashion industry to support Richard's ascent, moving to the suburbs, managing the household, and raising their children so he never had to worry about a thing. And her reward? She had become an embarrassment to him, a dirty little secret he kept tucked away in Connecticut so she wouldn't tarnish his pristine, glossy image. A tear slipped down her cheek, but Clara wiped it away furiously. She was tired of crying. She was tired of feeling invisible. But as she turned off the bedroom lights and walked down the hall to check on her sleeping children, she didn't yet know that her breaking point was less than 12 hours away. Saturday morning arrived with a dreary, grey drizzle that perfectly matched Clara's mood. Richard had left the house by 7 a.m., claiming he had an emergency weekend strategy summit in Manhattan regarding the upcoming acquisition of Atelier Rousseau, a notoriously elusive, high-end French luxury brand. Clara spent the morning feeding the kids, breaking up arguments over toys, and cleaning up spilled juice. By noon, she finally managed to get both Oliver and Sophie down for a nap. Enjoying a rare moment of silence, she went into Richard's pristine home office to empty the trash and gather some stray coffee mugs. As she reached for a mug on his mahogany desk, the screen of his iPad Pro, which he had accidentally left behind and unlocked, suddenly lit up. A text message notification flashed across the screen. "Chloe Sinclair, did you leave the house mouse some cheese before you left? Can't wait for the suite at the plaza tonight." Clara froze. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her hand trembled violently as she reached out and hovered her finger over the screen. She knew that opening the message thread would open Pandora's box, irrevocably destroying her marriage. But the disrespect, the sheer, cruel audacity of being called a house mouse, shattered whatever restraint she had left. She tapped the screen. The message thread between Richard and Chloe loaded, stretching back for months. It wasn't just a physical affair. It was an emotional assassination. Clara scrolled, her vision blurring with furious tears as she read the exchanges. "Richard, she actually asked to go to the Vanguard Gala last night. Can you imagine?" Chloe, "LMAO, what would she even wear? A maternity sweater. You handled it, right?" Richard, "Of course. Told her she wouldn't fit in. She bought it. She's completely clueless. See you at the gala. Wear that red silk dress. I want everyone looking at us." Clara dropped the iPad onto the desk. A strange, eerie calm washed over her. She didn't collapse. She didn't scream. The crushing grief that usually accompanied Richard's cruelty bypassed her heart entirely and settled in her spine, transforming into a rod of cold, unbreakable steel. House mouse, maternity sweater, completely clueless. Clara backed out of the office, closing the door quietly. She walked down the hallway, pulled down the heavy wooden stairs leading to the attic, and climbed up into the dusty, dimly lit space. She walked past the boxes of Christmas decorations and old baby clothes until she reached the far corner. There, hidden under an old tarp, was a heavy vintage steamer trunk. She knelt beside it, input the combination, and popped the brass locks. The smell of old paper, charcoal, and expensive fabric wafted up. Inside were dozens of leather-bound sketchbooks, swatches of the rarest silks from Lyon, and portfolios of technical fashion illustrations. Before she was Clara Sterling, the invisible suburban housewife, she was Clara Beaumont. And Clara Beaumont wasn't just a fashion student, she was a prodigy. 6 years ago, she had worked in Paris under a strict non-disclosure agreement as the anonymous lead ghost designer for none other than Atelier Rousseau. She was the secret genius behind their most critically acclaimed collection, known to the industry elite only by her initials, CB. She had walked away from it all when she got pregnant with Oliver, choosing family over the grueling, cutthroat world of Parisian haute couture. Richard, who only cared about numbers and spreadsheets, never understood the magnitude of her talent. To him, she had just sketched dresses. As Clara dug through the trunk, her hand brushed against something stiff and unfamiliar. It was a thick, black, velvet-textured envelope. It looked relatively new. Frowning, Clara pulled it out. The wax seal on the back bore the distinct, elegant crest of Atelier Rousseau. But what made Clara's blood run cold was the name elegantly calligraphed on the front, Madame Clara Beaumont, personal and confidential. The envelope had been opened. Richard had intercepted it. Clara pulled out the heavy cardstock inside. It was a personal letter from Antoine Rousseau, the legendary founder of the fashion house. My dearest Clara, CB, it has been too long. The soul of Atelier Rousseau has missed your touch. We are currently fending off aggressive acquisition attempts from vulgar American corporate firms like Sterling and Harrison. Before I make any decisions about the future of my legacy, I need to see you. I am officially inviting you to the Vanguard Gala in New York next Friday as my personal, honored VIP guest. I have enclosed an all-access platinum credential. Please say you will come. Yours, Antoine. Clara stared at the letter, her mind racing, piecing the puzzle together. Richard's firm was trying to buy Atelier Rousseau. Richard was desperate to close the deal to secure his promotion to full partner. Antoine Rousseau, the man holding all the cards, hated Richard's firm and was secretly reaching out to Clara, the very wife Richard was hiding and humiliating, to save his company. And Richard had found the letter, opened it, and hidden it in the attic to prevent Clara from going, likely terrified she would embarrass him or interfere with his business. He had no idea Antoine respected her. He probably thought it was a spam invitation. A slow, dangerous smile crept onto Clara's face. It was a smile she hadn't worn in half a decade. Richard wanted a show. He wanted haute couture. He wanted to parade his glamorous mistress at the most exclusive event of the year while leaving his house mouse in the dark. All right, Richard, Clara whispered to the empty attic, clutching the platinum VIP pass. You want high society? You want the genius of Atelier Rousseau? You're going to get it. She didn't shed another tear. She didn't confront him when he came home late on Sunday, smelling faintly of Chloe's perfume. Instead, she spent the next 5 days in absolute, focused silence. She called her mother to arrange a week-long stay for the kids. She maxed out a secret credit card she had kept from her Paris days to rent a private suite at the St. Regis, and most importantly, she unlocked her creative vault, pulling out a design she had drafted years ago, but never had the courage to bring to life. The house mouse was dead. Clara Beaumont was about to make her spectacular return, and she was going to burn Richard Sterling's perfectly curated world to ashes. By Tuesday morning, the Connecticut house was dead silent. Richard had left for a crucial pre-gala strategy week in the city, which Clara knew perfectly well was a thinly veiled excuse to spend 5 days with Chloe Sinclair at the plaza. Clara didn't care. His absence was exactly the runway she needed. After tearful but firm goodbyes, she had dropped 4-year-old Oliver and 2-year-old Sophie at her mother's idyllic farmhouse in upstate New York. Her mother, a shrewd woman who had never quite trusted Richard's overly polished veneer, took one look at Clara's eyes and didn't ask a single question. She simply took the children, kissed her daughter's forehead, and said, "Do what you need to do." Clara drove her modest Volvo SUV directly into Manhattan, leaving it at a long-term parking garage before taking a cab to the St. Regis. When she walked into her opulent, antique-furnished suite, she didn't collapse onto the plush, king-sized bed. Instead, she immediately opened the vintage steamer trunk she had hauled from her attic and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 6 years. It rang 3 times before a gruff, heavily accented voice answered. Henri Dupont bespoke. We are not taking new clients for the season. Goodbye. Henri, Clara said, her voice steady. It's CB. Silence hung on the line, thick and heavy. Then the sound of scissors dropping onto a wooden cutting table echoed through the speaker. Clara, mon Dieu, Clara Beaumont. They told me you died, or worse, moved to the American suburbs to bake pies. The latter, unfortunately, Clara replied, a dry smile touching her lips. Henri, I need a favor. The biggest favor I've ever asked. I need your private studio, your fastest seamstresses, and your absolute discretion. I have 4 days to build a masterpiece for the Vanguard Gala. Henri, a master tailor who had once turned Clara's wildest, gravity-defying sketches into reality during her secret tenure at Atelier Rousseau, let out a booming laugh. 4 days? For the Vanguard? You are insane, my dear. Get down to Soho immediately. The espresso is already brewing. For the next 96 hours, Henri's private subterranean atelier became Clara's war room. The house mouse that Richard had so easily dismissed was gone, replaced by the relentless, visionary artist who had once brought the Parisian fashion elite to their knees. They worked with a manic, obsessive energy. Clara had selected a fabric she had hoarded for years. A mesmerizing, midnight blue silk organza woven with microscopic threads of crushed onyx, giving the material a liquid, shifting luminescence under direct light. It wasn't just a dress, it was architectural warfare. The bodice was an aggressive, structured corset of asymmetrical pleating that mirrored the iconic shattered glass motif she had secretly invented for Rousseau's legendary 2018 winter collection, a technique that no other designer had ever successfully replicated. The skirt flowed like dark water, featuring a daring, thigh-high slit that was both elegant and lethal. As Clara stood on the pedestal on Thursday night, exhausted but glowing, Henri carefully pinned the final drape of the silk across her shoulder. He stepped back, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow, his eyes shining with unshed tears. It is perfect, Henri whispered reverently. It is the phantom of Rousseau, brought to life. When Antoine sees this, when the world sees this. I'm not doing this for the world, Henri, Clara said, her green eyes cold and sharp in the mirrored reflection. I'm doing this for a specific audience of 2, and a certain husband who forgot how to see me. Meanwhile, just 30 blocks uptown, in a sprawling suite at the Plaza Hotel, Richard Sterling was pouring himself a glass of 20-year-old Macallan. Chloe Sinclair lounged on the velvet sofa, reviewing the final slides of their aggressive acquisition deck. Antoine Rousseau is a sentimental old fool, Chloe sneered, tapping her manicured nail against the iPad screen. He's bleeding capital because he refuses to mass-produce his pret-a-porter lines. Tomorrow night, we corner him at the gala. We present the buyout not as an option, but as an inevitability. If he resists, we initiate the hostile takeover Monday morning. Richard smirked, loosening his tie. He felt invincible. He was about to secure his partnership. He had the most beautiful woman at his firm in his hotel room, and his naive, frumpy wife was safely tucked away in the suburbs, probably folding laundry. Rousseau won't know what hit him, Richard said, clinking his crystal glass against Chloe's. By midnight tomorrow, Atelier Rousseau belongs to Sterling and Harrison, and I will finally have everything I deserve. He had no idea how right and how devastatingly wrong he was. The Vanguard Summit Gala was held at Cipriani Wall Street, a venue that practically dripped with neo-Greek grandeur, massive marble columns, and towering vaulted ceilings. By 9 p.m., the grand ballroom was a sea of bespoke tuxedos, blinding diamonds, and the intoxicating scent of expensive perfumes. This was the undisputed epicenter of power in New York City, a collision of high finance, high fashion, and high society. Richard Sterling arrived precisely at 9:15 p.m., perfectly calibrated for maximum impact. He wore a custom Tom Ford tuxedo that fit him like a glove. On his arm was Chloe Sinclair, looking undeniably striking in a blood-red silk sheath dress that left very little to the imagination. They walked the red carpet with the synchronized arrogance of conquering royalty, pausing just long enough for the society photographers to capture their power couple aesthetic. "There he is," Chloe whispered, her grip tightening on Richard's arm as they stepped into the main ballroom. Standing near the towering ice sculpture at the center of the room, flanked by two imposing bodyguards, was Antoine Rousseau. The legendary French designer was in his late 60s, sporting a silver beard and an impeccably tailored velvet smoking jacket. He looked utterly bored, swatting away investment bankers and socialites like pesky mosquitoes. Richard straightened his posture and plastered on his most charming, predatory smile. "Showtime. Let's go put the old man out of his misery." They navigated the crowded room, seamlessly weaving through the elite until they reached Antoine's perimeter. "Monsieur Rousseau," Richard projected, his voice booming with forced familiarity. "Richard Sterling. We spoke briefly via my assistant regarding the Sterling and Harrison proposal. This is my colleague, Chloe Sinclair. We are thrilled you could make it across the Atlantic." Antoine slowly turned his head. His piercing blue eyes lazily dragged up and down Richard's pristine tuxedo, then flicked dismissively to Chloe's red dress. It was a look of pure, unadulterated boredom. "Mr. Sterling," Antoine said, his French accent thick and unapologetic, "your firm has been quite relentless, sending proposals like junk mail. I believe I have made my stance clear. My house is not for sale to corporate butchers." Chloe stepped forward, flashing a brilliant, calculating smile. "Monsieur Rousseau, with respect, the market data suggests your house needs our infrastructure to survive the next quarter. We are offering a lifeline." "You are offering a noose, mademoiselle," Antoine replied coldly, turning his back slightly. "Now, if you will excuse me, I am waiting for an honored guest, someone with actual talent rather than a spreadsheet." Richard's jaw tightened. The humiliation stung, but he maintained his composure. Let the old man play hard to get, he thought. By Monday, we'll rip the company from his cold, dead hands. He opened his mouth to deliver a sharp retort, but the words died in his throat. A sudden, strange hush was falling over the grand entrance of Cipriani. It started as a ripple and quickly turned into a tidal wave of silence, broken only by the frantic, rapid-fire click-click-click of 24 camera shutters going off simultaneously. Heads were turning. Conversations were dying mid-sentence. Even the string quartet playing softly in the corner seemed to falter. Richard frowned, craning his neck to see over the crowd. "What's going on? Did the mayor arrive?" "I don't know," Chloe muttered, standing on her tiptoes. "Whoever it is, the fashion editors are losing their minds." Isabella Ricci, the notoriously ruthless editor-in-chief of Haute magazine, was standing 10 feet away. Richard watched as Isabella actually dropped her champagne flute onto the marble floor, her jaw unhinged, her eyes wide behind her signature dark glasses. "It can't be," Isabella gasped, gripping the arm of her assistant. "Is that the shattered glass pleating? My God, who is she?" The crowd naturally parted, forming an aisle of awe and intense curiosity. And then Richard saw her. She paused at the top of the grand marble staircase, bathed in the soft golden light of the chandeliers. The midnight blue silk organza seemed to move with a life of its own, capturing the light and throwing it back as liquid onyx. The structural bodice was a masterclass in avant-garde design, framing her porcelain shoulders and collarbone with aggressive, breathtaking elegance. Her dark hair, usually hidden in a frumpy bun, was now a sleek, razor-sharp bob that framed her face flawlessly. A single, flawless diamond choker, alone from Henri's personal vault, rested at her throat. She looked like a dark queen descending to claim her throne. She looked terrifying, beautiful, and completely untouchable. Richard's breath hitched, his brain short-circuited. He stared at the mysterious woman, a sudden, violent sense of familiarity hitting him like a physical blow to the stomach. "Good Lord," Chloe whispered venomously beside him, entirely unaware of Richard's internal collapse. "Who does she think she is? Look at that dress. It's too much. It's trying too hard." But Richard couldn't hear Chloe. The blood was rushing in his ears. His eyes tracked the woman as she began to descend the stairs, her movements fluid and utterly confident. He recognized the shape of her eyes. He recognized the tilt of her chin. It couldn't be. It was mathematically, logically, and fundamentally impossible. "Clara," Richard whispered, the name tasting like ash on his tongue. The woman reached the bottom of the stairs. The heavy hitters of New York's high society were practically tripping over themselves to clear a path for her. As she walked, her gaze swept the room. It bypassed the billionaires, the celebrities, and the politicians. Her striking green eyes locked dead onto the center of the room. They locked dead onto Richard. For a split second, Clara paused. She looked at Richard, then at Chloe standing beside him in her predictable red dress. A slow, chilling smile spread across Clara's lips, a smile that communicated absolute, devastating power. Richard felt his knees go weak. It was Clara, his house mouse, the woman he had mocked, hidden away, and betrayed, and she was currently commanding the attention of the most powerful people in the Western Hemisphere. But the true shock was yet to come. Antoine Rousseau, who had been completely ignoring Richard a moment ago, suddenly let out a loud, joyous laugh that echoed through the quiet ballroom. The legendary designer shoved past Richard, completely knocking Chloe out of the way, and practically ran toward Clara. "CB!" Antoine roared, throwing his arms wide open. Right in front of the flashing cameras, the Vogue editors, and a paralyzed Richard Sterling, the billionaire founder of Atelier Rousseau, dropped to one knee, took Clara's hand, and kissed the back of it with absolute reverence. "My muse," Antoine declared, his voice carrying over the stunned crowd. "You have finally returned to me." The silence in Cipriani Wall Street was absolute, broken only by the frantic mechanical whir and clicking of press cameras. To Richard Sterling, the sound was deafening, like a firing squad loading their rifles. Antoine Rousseau, a man who possessed a legendary disdain for American corporate culture, was kneeling on the imported marble floor. He held the hand of the woman Richard had hidden in a Connecticut suburb for 5 years, treating her like royalty. "Antoine, please," Clara said, her voice a smooth, melodic purr that carried effortlessly across the silent room. "You are embarrassing me. Stand up. It has been far too long." She spoke with a cool, refined, transatlantic lilt that Richard had never heard her use. Antoine stood, his eyes shining with genuine emotion. "Embarrassing you? My dear CB, I am honoring the ghost that gave my house its soul. For 6 years, the industry has begged me to reveal the genius behind the 2018 Shattered Obsidian collection. And now here you are, wearing the very evolution of that masterpiece." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Isabella Ricci, the editor-in-chief of Haute magazine, nearly dropped her phone. The 2018 Rousseau collection was practically holy scripture in the fashion world. The identity of its lead designer, known only as CB, was one of the industry's most fiercely guarded secrets. Richard felt his chest tighten, panic constricting his lungs. His brain aggressively rejected the reality unfolding before him. CB Clara Beaumont. No, she's just a mother. She folds my shirts. She cries when I raise my voice. Beside him, Chloe Sinclair was turning a sickly shade of pale. The arrogant smirk had completely melted off her face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. She looked from Clara's devastatingly intricate midnight blue gown to her own mass-produced red silk dress, suddenly realizing she looked incredibly cheap by comparison. "Richard," Chloe hissed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his tuxedo jacket. "Richard, do something! That's your wife! What is she doing? She's ruining the acquisition!" Driven by blind ego and the desperate need to regain control, Richard shoved past a group of stunned investment bankers and marched directly into the center of the room. "Clara!" Richard barked, his voice sharp and authoritative, attempting to use the same tone he used to scold her about household chores. "What is the meaning of this? Why are you here? You told me you were upstate with your mother." Clara slowly turned her head. The warmth in her eyes as she looked at Antoine vanished instantly, replaced by a glacial, predatory calm as she locked eyes with her husband. "I am attending a gala, Richard," Clara replied, her voice dangerously quiet, but amplified by the sheer silence of the room. "I was explicitly invited as a VIP guest." "Were you?" Richard flushed crimson, his authority crumbling in front of New York's elite. "Don't play games with me, Clara. You're confused. You don't belong here. This is a high-level corporate event, not one of your little suburban book clubs. Let's go. Now." He reached out, grabbing her wrist with a harsh, bruising grip. Before Clara could pull away, a heavy, silver-topped cane slammed down hard onto Richard's knuckles. Richard yelped, releasing Clara immediately. He stumbled back, clutching his hand, to find Antoine Rousseau glaring at him with a look of pure, homicidal disgust. The French billionaire stepped smoothly in front of Clara, shielding her. "Do not ever touch her with that vulgar hand again," Antoine growled, his thick accent dripping with venom. He looked at Clara, then back at Richard, the realization dawning on his weathered face. "Wait. You are Richard Sterling, the corporate butcher from Sterling and Harrison, the man sending me harassing emails for 6 months. I am the senior vice president of the firm that is going to save your dying brand, Monsieur Rousseau," Richard spat, trying to salvage his pride. "And this woman is my wife. She's unwell. She needs to go home." Antoine let out a dry, humorless bark of laughter that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "Save my brand? You arrogant, oblivious little boy." Antoine signaled to the string quartet to stop playing altogether. He turned to the crowd, grabbing a microphone from the podium that had been set up for the evening's speeches. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, and esteemed guests of the Vanguard Summit," Antoine announced, his voice booming through the speakers. "For months, the vultures of Wall Street, specifically the firm of Sterling and Harrison, have been circling Atelier Rousseau, attempting a hostile takeover. They believe my house is weak. They believe I have no successor." Antoine turned and extended a hand toward Clara. She stepped forward into the spotlight, the crushed onyx threads in her gown catching the light like a dark, starry night. "Allow me to officially introduce my successor," Antoine declared, "the new creative director, acting CEO, and majority shareholder of Atelier Rousseau, Madame Clara Beaumont." The ballroom erupted. It was a scene of absolute pandemonium. Photographers shoved each other to get a clean shot of Clara. Fashion executives began frantically texting their boards of directors. Richard felt the floor drop out from beneath him. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. Majority shareholder? CEO. Clara wasn't just wearing a pretty dress. She owned the company he had promised to buy. She held his entire career, his partnership, and his professional reputation in the palm of her elegantly manicured hand. And she was about to crush it. The air inside the cavernous hall of Cipriani Wall Street felt as though it had been violently sucked out by a vacuum. The only sound left in the wake of Antoine Rousseau's earth-shattering announcement was the frantic, aggressive frenzy of 100 camera shutters firing simultaneously. To Richard Sterling, the rapid click-click-click sounded exactly like the ticking of a bomb that had just been detonated directly beneath his carefully curated, perfect life. Clara stood at the center of the pandemonium, bathed in the golden light of the chandeliers. The crushed onyx threads woven into a midnight blue silk gown caught the aggressive flashes of the paparazzi, making her look as though she were draped in a glittering, impenetrable armor of night sky. She did not shrink back. She did not look down. The timid, exhausted housewife who had spent the last 5 years folding Richard's custom shirts in a lonely Connecticut laundry room was gone, completely eradicated by the sheer, imposing presence of the new CEO of Atelier Rousseau. As the flashbulbs continued to explode around them, Clara slowly turned her head. Her striking green eyes bypassed the stunned billionaires and the gawking fashion editors, locking directly onto Chloe Sinclair. Chloe was currently standing near a massive, melting swan ice sculpture, trembling so violently that the champagne in her glass was spilling over the rim onto her knuckles. The arrogant, triumphant smirk she had worn all evening had melted into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. Suddenly her blood-red silk sheath dress, which she had bought specifically to outshine everyone in the room, looked tragically cheap, like a mass-produced knockoff standing next to an irreplaceable museum artifact. Clara leaned slightly towards the silver microphone that Antoine still held in his hand. When she spoke, her voice was a smooth, melodic purr that carried effortlessly across the silent, captivated ballroom. "Oh, and Richard?" Clara said, her tone dripping with a refined, venomous elegance. "I was doing a bit of light tidying in your home office this weekend. It seems you accidentally left your iPad unlocked on your desk. I received the fascinating text messages you and your colleague exchanged." A collective, scandalized gasp rippled through the crowd of New York's elite. Wall Street titans and high society socialites leaned in, practically salivating at the unfolding drama. Clara shifted her gaze entirely to the trembling junior partner. It seems Miss Sinclair was incredibly concerned about what the house mouse would be wearing tonight. I believe the exact phrase used was that I would likely show up in a maternity sweater and humiliate you. Clara took a deliberate, agonizingly slow step forward. She gestured elegantly to her bespoke, gravity-defying silk gown, a masterful architectural creation that would undoubtedly be plastered on the cover of Vogue by Monday morning. The asymmetrical pleating caught the light, showcasing the legendary genius of the CB moniker. "Tell me, Chloe," Clara asked, her voice echoing off the vaulted marble ceilings, "does this look like a maternity sweater to you?" The sheer, brutal public humiliation was executed with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Several prominent women in the crowd, including the notoriously terrifying Isabella Ricci, actually laughed aloud. It wasn't a polite laugh. It was a cruel, mocking sound. Isabella lowered her dark sunglasses, her eyes scanning Chloe's now inadequate red dress with completely unfiltered pity and disdain. Chloe's face turned the color of a bruised plum. She covered her mouth with a manicured hand, fighting back tears of absolute mortification. Unable to withstand the crushing weight of 100 mocking stares, she physically backed away from Richard, treating him as if he were suddenly radioactive. "Clara, stop," Richard pleaded, his voice cracking loudly in the quiet room. His aggressive corporate facade had completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, desperate, and remarkably small man. Sweat beaded on his forehead, ruining his expensive Tom Ford styling. "Please, let's just talk about this privately. Come with me to the coat check. Don't do this here, in front of everyone." "You lost the right to private conversations the moment you brought your mistress into the negotiation room, Richard," Clara replied, her voice devoid of even a single ounce of sympathy. She looked at him as if he were a stain on the marble floor. "You spent 5 years telling me I was invisible. You gaslit me into believing I was nothing more than a frumpy burden. You told me to my face that I didn't fit in with your high society crowd." Clara looked out over the sea of hedge fund managers, politicians, and fashion icons who were hanging on to her every single word, entirely captivated by her command of the room. "You were right, Richard," Clara said, her green eyes flashing with absolute, devastating triumph. "I don't fit in with your crowd. I outrank them." "Sterling!" A thunderous, gravelly voice roared from the back of the VIP section, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd like a heavy broadsword. The crowd parted instantly, practically tripping over themselves to clear a path. Arthur Harrison, The ruthless 70-year-old CEO and founding partner of Sterling and Harrison marched forward. His face was a mask of pure, unrestrained fury, the veins in his neck bulging against his starched white collar. He was flanked by two other senior partners, all of whom looked ready to commit a public execution. "Arthur, sir," Richard stammered, his posture instantly crumbling into pathetic submission. He held his hands up defensively. "I can explain. I swear to you I had no idea. This is just a domestic misunderstanding that has gotten slightly out of hand." "A domestic misunderstanding?" Arthur bellowed, completely ignoring the flashing cameras of the press. He stopped inches from Richard's face, his voice dripping with acid. "You assured the board of directors that you had Antoine Rousseau cornered. You guaranteed us the acquisition of the decade by midnight tonight. And I arrive here to find out that not only is the company firmly not for sale, but the newly appointed CEO is your alienated, publicly humiliated wife." Arthur turned his furious, predatory gaze towards the trembling woman in the red dress. "And you, Sinclair, you were supposed to be the closer on this deal. Instead, you're standing there crying, acting as the punchline to a joke in front of the entire global financial sector." "Arthur, I had no idea!" Chloe shrieked, tears finally spilling over her cheeks and ruining her perfectly applied mascara. Desperation made her vicious, and she reverted to her basic survival instincts. She pointed a trembling finger directly at Richard. "Richard lied to me. He told me his wife was a nobody. He said she was just a stay-at-home mother who baked cookies. He's a liability, Arthur. He bungled this entire acquisition because of his own massive ego." Richard stared at Chloe, his jaw dropping in sheer disbelief. The woman he had risked his marriage for, the glamorous mistress he had showered with expensive hotel rooms and designer jewelry, had just thrown him under a speeding bus without a second of hesitation to save her own skin. Arthur Harrison sneered in absolute disgust, looking at Richard as if he were a dying insect. Then, in a display of sociopathic corporate agility, Arthur physically turned his back on his senior vice president. He faced Clara, immediately changing his entire demeanor from a raging tyrant to one of groveling, polished diplomacy. "Madame Beaumont," Arthur said, offering a deep, respectful nod. "Please accept my deepest, most sincere apologies for the spectacularly unprofessional conduct of my employees. I assure you, this does not reflect the values of my firm." Sterling and Harrison still highly values the infrastructure of Atelier Rousseau. Perhaps we could schedule a private, catered lunch on Monday to discuss a new, more equitable and highly profitable partnership. Clara looked at the billionaire CEO. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She simply adjusted the flawless diamond choker resting at her throat. "Mr. Harrison," Clara said smoothly, her voice ringing out like a crystal bell, "Atelier Rousseau will never do business with your firm in a creative capacity. However, as the new majority shareholder, I will be overseeing a massive influx of international capital. I might consider keeping my new company's hundreds of millions of dollars in corporate accounts at your bank, but only under one strict, non-negotiable condition." Arthur's eyes lit up with greedy, immediate desperation. He would sell his own grandmother for the Rousseau accounts. "Name it, Madame Beaumont. Absolutely anything you desire." Clara locked eyes with Richard. She looked at the man who had broken her heart, shattered her confidence, and left her to wither in the dark while he paraded around Manhattan. "Richard Sterling is fired," Clara demanded, her voice echoing with finality, "effective immediately, stripped of his severance package, stripped of his stock options, and blacklisted from any financial institution that wishes to do business with Rousseau." Richard gasped, stumbling backward as if he had been physically struck in the chest with a sledgehammer. "Clara, you can't! It's my life. I built that firm. We have children." "Consider it done," Arthur Harrison said, without a microsecond of hesitation, not even looking at Richard. He waved a dismissive hand. "You're done, Sterling. Your keycard is deactivated. Clear your desk by midnight, or security will throw your belongings into the street. Sinclair, you're on probation. Get out of my sight before I fire you, too." Richard's knees finally buckled. He collapsed onto the cold marble floor of Cipriani. His bespoke suit suddenly felt like a straitjacket, suffocating him. He had lost absolutely everything. His marriage, his massive six-figure salary, his prestigious reputation, and his entire future, all meticulously dismantled and destroyed in less than 10 minutes. The crowd began to murmur loudly, pointing and whispering, ruthlessly watching the former golden boy of Wall Street weep openly on the floor. Clara didn't offer him a final glance. The invisible woman was dead. She turned her back on the wreckage of her husband, taking Antoine Rousseau's graciously offered arm. Together, they walked toward the exclusive VIP dining area, a phalanx of heavy security guards instantly forming a protective, impenetrable barrier around them, leaving Richard Sterling completely alone in the devastating, humiliating ruins of his own making. Monday morning brought a harsh, unforgiving sunlight that cut through the cheap, unwashed blinds of a dilapidated motel room in Queens. Richard Sterling sat on the edge of a sagging, floral print mattress, staring at the blank screen of his phone. 72 hours ago, he was the golden boy of Wall Street, drinking Macallan at the plaza and preparing to secure a $100 million buyout. Now he was a pariah. The fallout from the Vanguard Gala had been nuclear. Isabella Ricci's scathing two-page editorial in Haute magazine had hit the digital presses on Sunday morning. The headline read, "The Muse Returns, How CB Resurrected Rousseau and Destroyed Wall Street's Most Arrogant Executive." It featured a high-resolution, full-page photograph of Clara looking like a victorious goddess, while Richard was captured in the background, on his knees, his face twisted in pathetic desperation. The humiliation was total. Arthur Harrison hadn't just fired Richard. He had systematically nuked Richard's entire network. When Richard tried to call his contacts at Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley on Sunday afternoon, begging for a junior analyst position just to keep his health insurance, his calls went straight to voicemail. No one wanted the man who had publicly botched the acquisition of the decade and been humiliated by his own wife. Even Chloe had abandoned ship. When Richard texted her, desperate for an ally, the message immediately bounced back green. She had blocked his number, packed up her desk, and fled to a boutique firm in Chicago to escape the unrelenting mockery of the New York financial sector. "I can fix this," Richard muttered to himself, his hands shaking as he rubbed his bloodshot eyes. "I just need to access the offshore accounts, the Cayman investments. I can hire a crisis PR firm. I can sue her for alimony." He pulled up his banking app, typing in his master password. He had been secretly siphoning marital funds for 3 years, preparing for the day he would inevitably dump Clara for someone younger and more glamorous. He smiled grimly as the loading wheel spun. He still had $2 million hidden away. He wasn't entirely dead yet. The screen loaded. Richard's heart stopped. Account balance, $0. Status, frozen by court order. A violent knock on the motel room door made him jump out of his skin. He stumbled over, unlocking the flimsy chain. A bored-looking process server stood in the hallway, holding a thick manila envelope. "Richard Sterling?" the man asked, chewing a piece of gum. "Yes," Richard croaked. "You've been served." The man shoved the envelope into Richard's chest and walked away without another word. Richard tore it open. It was a massive stack of legal documents filed by the monstrously expensive, cutthroat divorce attorneys at Kirkland and Ellis. Clara wasn't just divorcing him. She was dismantling him. The documents detailed a forensic financial audit that had easily uncovered his hidden offshore accounts, his unauthorized credit lines, and the thousands of dollars he had spent on hotel rooms and jewelry for Chloe Sinclair. At the bottom of the first page was a sticky note, written in Clara's elegant, sweeping handwriting. "See you at 2 p.m. Don't be late." At exactly 1:55 p.m., Richard walked into the soaring, glass-walled conference room on the 50th floor of the Kirkland and Ellis skyscraper in Manhattan. He looked 10 years older, His suit was rumpled, his hair was unkempt, and the arrogant swagger that had once defined him was completely gone. Sitting at the head of the massive mahogany table was Clara. She looked immaculate. She was wearing a tailored, double-breasted cream suit from her upcoming Rousseau spring collection, paired with vintage Cartier earrings. Beside her sat two incredibly intimidating lawyers who looked like they enjoyed destroying lives for sport. "Have a seat, Richard," Clara said smoothly, not bothering to stand up. Richard sank into the leather chair opposite her. "Clara, please. You froze my accounts. My Porsche was repossessed this morning because the lease was tied to the firm. I have nothing." "You have exactly what you earned," Clara replied, her voice as cold as ice. She slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the table. "This is the final settlement. You're going to sign it right now, or my legal team will drag this out in open court until the press uncovers every single pathetic, illegal financial maneuver you made at Sterling and Harrison. You'll go from being unemployed to facing federal wire fraud charges." Richard frantically opened the folder, his eyes scanning the aggressive legal jargon. His face grew paler with every page he turned. "Full custody," Richard gasped, looking up. "You're taking Oliver and Sophie." "I already have them," Clara corrected him sharply. "They are currently on a private jet bound for Paris with my mother. They will be attending the international school, and they will grow up surrounded by art, culture, and love. Not by a father who views them as accessories for his Christmas cards." "You're taking the Connecticut house?" "I'm selling the Connecticut house," Clara said, taking a sip of sparkling water. "The proceeds will reimburse the marital funds you embezzled to pay for your mistress. You will receive 0 alimony. You will walk away with your clothes, your debt, and the profound realization that you threw away a diamond to pick up a worthless rock." Richard felt the tears welling up in his eyes. The absolute, crushing reality of his karma had finally arrived. He was a man who worshipped status, power, and wealth, and the quiet, unassuming woman he had treated like dirt had just stripped him of all three in less than a week. "Clara, I'm sorry," Richard wept, his voice breaking. "I was blind. I was stupid. I love you." Clara leaned forward, resting her elbows on the mahogany table. She looked at the broken man weeping in front of her, and for the first time she felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a quiet, profound relief. "You didn't love me, Richard," Clara said softly, but firmly. "You loved the convenience of me. You loved having a maid, a nanny, and a punching bag all rolled into one so you could pretend to be a king. But kings are born, Richard. They aren't made in cubicles." She slid a sleek silver Mont Blanc pen across the table. It stopped precisely in front of his trembling hands. "Sign the papers, Richard. The house mouse has places to be." Defeated, utterly destroyed, and completely outmatched, Richard picked up the pen and signed his name, signing away his family, his wealth, and his dignity. 6 months later, the Grand Palais in Paris was illuminated by 1,000 spotlights. It was the closing night of Paris Fashion Week, and the anticipation in the air was electric. Backstage, Clara Beaumont stood before a massive mirror, adjusting the delicate, shattered glass silk collar of her lead model. She was no longer the exhausted, invisible wife hiding in the suburbs. She was the undisputed queen of the fashion world. Sales at Atelier Rousseau had skyrocketed by 400% since she took over as CEO and creative director. Antoine Rousseau, now happily retired in the south of France, sent her a bouquet of white roses every single morning. The stage manager jogged over, wearing a headset. "Madame Beaumont, they are ready for you. The crowd is going wild." Clara smiled. She thought briefly of Richard, who, according to her lawyers, was currently working as a mid-level shift manager at a retail electronics store in New Jersey, desperately trying to pay off his massive legal debts while living in a cramped studio apartment. The karma had been absolute, but Richard was the past. Clara stepped out from behind the velvet curtain, the blinding flashes of the Parisian paparazzi washing over her as the crowd erupted into a deafening standing ovation. She walked down the runway, not as a shadow, but as a brilliant, unstoppable force of nature. She had finally stepped into the light, and she was never, ever going back to the dark. What an absolutely epic and satisfying conclusion to Clara's journey. From being hidden away and humiliated to completely destroying Richard's corrupt corporate world and reclaiming her throne in Paris, Clara proved that you should never underestimate the quiet ones. Richard's devastating fall from a high-powered Wall Street executive to a broke retail worker is the exact kind of instant karma he deserved for betraying his family. Did you expect Clara to take over the entire company and fire him on the spot? Let me know your favorite twist in the comment section down below. If this story of ultimate revenge, high fashion, and justice kept you on the edge of your seat, please absolutely smash that like button right now. It helps the channel bring you more amazing real-life drama stories. Don't forget to share this video with someone who loves a brilliant underdog victory, and hit that subscribe button with the notification bell turned on so you never miss out on our next thrilling storytelling adventure. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you all in the next video.